City Center Radio. It is episode 231, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Monday, March 4th, 2024. Welcome back. Hope you had a great weekend. Thank you for tuning in to Holy City Center Radio. So glad to be back with you. Hope you enjoyed last week's episodes. Every episode last week, all three were interviews. So if you missed them, go back and give a little listen because they were all very good. Some different stories from all sorts of different parts of Charleston and different, entities being involved. So it was really interesting for me to hear a little bit about, all these different things. We're talking about working out. We're talking about restaurants and hospitality. We're talking about theater, just a nice variety. So definitely go back and listen. I enjoyed speaking with each of those guests last week, and I hope you all enjoyed listening if you haven't already. Also, as promised, a quick little review, not this past weekend, the weekend before. I went to Atlanta, celebrated my birthday there, had a blast, was able to see a friend of mine who lives there. It was great catching up with her. I stayed at the Claremont Hotel, which I wanted to stay at for a while. It's attached to the world famous Claremont Lounge. Although they share a name, they're not actually the same business or anything like that. There's really no ties, just that it's in the same building. But you can't even get to one from the other without going outside. That's how separate they are. So for those who are familiar, that's where it's located. It's really cool little boutique hotel. Had really good, customer service. They had, a few cool things like little trinkets, like matchbooks and stuff, and everything is labeled with their name, so that was fun. And it kind of has like an old timey vibe, staying in a motel almost, or an old hotel, with all the just the vibe of the whole place and the decor and some of the things that they, had in the rooms and whatnot. And it was just fun. It was just a cool little spot, near the Ponce City Market, which I went to one day, which I've been to before, but it was nice to walk around in there again. I also went to a Atlanta Hawks game, the first Hawks game I've ever been to. I've been to NBA games before, but that was my first one in Atlanta. They were playing the Orlando Magic, which was a good game. Had fun, just a great trip. There's a couple other things I wanted to do, and I'd actually planned to do some things on Sunday, not thinking that, of course, a lot of those things would be closed. So still some things I want to do when I get back there. I also got Slutty Vegan, which is this vegan, obviously, restaurant. They kind of have silly names for some of their items, as you can tell from their name. Very good. I got one of their burgers. I've had them before. They did like a pop-up at the Royal American here in Charleston once, and really enjoyed it. So that's why I knew when I got to Atlanta again, I definitely wanted to get their food. Their burger, obviously vegan, no meat, but it's one of those times where you don't really even realize, sometimes you try some like vegan or vegetarian versions of, meat products, and it doesn't always taste great, or it's very clear you're not eating a hamburger. This is one of those ones where you don't even realize, it actually just tastes really, really good. So that was another thing I did. If you're ever there, go check that out. But in any event, had a great time. Some things I definitely want to do the next time I'm there. I plan on going back. I just enjoy the city and some of the different things to do there. So it'd be fun to get back and do some of the things I missed out on this time around. Other than that, last week, fairly quiet outside of work, but I did go to the Lip Sync for Lungs event. I've talked about it before. I went to the media preview a couple weeks back, went to the actual event at the music hall last week. It was great, as always. They raised a lot of money for the American Lung Association. This was their 10th year of doing the event, so it's become a staple here in town. And they do amazing work, and they have, celebrities, people in the community who participate every year that will choose, a song or a mix of songs to do, lip syncing to, of course. And everybody who participates just comes through every year, great costumes and get-ups, fun takes on songs. This year was just incredible. One participant was did a mix of songs by the Talking Heads, and they came out with other people obviously to form a band, and they had the whole shtick going with the big suit and from the Stop Making Sense concert. Which is kind of making the rounds again in theaters, and it was great. And then another participant was doing like a Bon Jovi impression, or lip syncing, not impression, I guess. So they had the whole like 80s hair rocking band with him, and complete with like the pyrotechnics on the side of the stage. So it was really incredible. Just an amazing job this year. And I had a blast. And again, they raised a lot of money for a good cause. So that's what I've been up to. The first story here is sort of what I've been up to. Some good news I got this past week that I'll be sharing with you. And then I'll try to get you caught up on as many stories as I can. Whatever I don't get to, we'll get to on Wednesday or Friday. So without any more delay, let's get into the news. Yes, Best of Charleston nominations have come out. You may remember people nominated, their favorites in town just a few weeks back, and they've tallied those nominations, and we have our finalists. You can now go vote. The link in the show notes will get you there, so you can go pick your favorite Charleston businesses, people, sports teams, restaurants, whatever it may be. And I encourage you to do so. It's always fun to vote for your favorites and see who wins. And yes, I have to say that I am up in the running again for 3 categories this year. I'm very honored and humbled, and I so appreciate everyone that nominated Holy City Center in any categories. I really appreciate it. It's although this is now the 11th straight year that Holy City Center has been up for at least one award, and it never gets old. To see the name of my business. It seems funny to call it a business, but to see that name in the paper, online, being up for awards and stuff, it's really cool, and I really, really appreciate it. And this year, you can vote for Holy City Center for best local Twitter feed. It's listed as best local X feed because Elon Musk officially changed the name from Twitter to X, but I still call it Twitter, as do most people. So that is the first one, and that's actually one that all 11 years since the first nomination, all 11 years, Holy City Center has been at least nominated in that category. For the 9th straight year, I'm also a nominee in the best local website category. So go ahead and please vote for Holy City Center in that one. And then lastly, for the 2nd straight year, and the second time this has been a category, Holy City Center is a finalist for best local social media influencer. So those are the 3 categories: best local Twitter/X feed, best local website, and best local social media influencer. I would appreciate your votes. You only have to, there's no minimum amount of categories you have to vote in. So if you just want to do those 3, hey, that sounds good to me. But I encourage you to do as much as you want, because it is fun and it is nice to try to help out some other businesses or people or whatever it may be win awards, especially ones that haven't before. So I encourage you to do so. But I really appreciate everyone who nominated Holy City Center. I'll try not to bombard you with too many requests for votes. I appreciate those that already have. And if you have not yet, please go ahead and do so. Would mean a lot to me, and I really, really appreciate it. Well, in vitro fertilization, IVF, has become quite the hot topic around the country. Um, for those who are unfamiliar, Alabama had a recent ruling from one of their courts which found that frozen embryos would be considered unborn children, and it has jeopardized access to IVF treatments in Alabama. After the overturn of Roe v. Wade, different states have implemented different abortion policies, and Alabama, no surprise, is a very strict one. They say life begins at conception and at fertilization. And for those who aren't familiar with the IVF process, it does involve frozen embryos, which are eggs that have been fertilized. So under the law, this court ruled that, well, if life begins at fertilization, embryos are essentially unborn children because of that ruling. Now, they didn't really go any further than that, but IVF clinics in Alabama were afraid. So does that mean if they need to discard some embryos for whatever reason, they could be liable for murder? Like, what are we talking about here? And so a lot of clinics have temporarily stopped providing IVF treatments. Obviously, this is ridiculous. Embryos, not children. And IVF treatments are a way to help people get pregnant who, for whatever reason, can't or don't want to, whatever the reason is. Uh, you're now going to be preventing people from being able to use this treatment, a treatment that ostensibly you would think opponents would like because it helps women have more children. And this is just ridiculous that I don't think that's what the legislators intentions were when they were discussing abortion and when bans should start or not start at all or whatever in every state. But it's ridiculous, and this is what we've talked about. When you put these unserious people who don't understand science and medicine, when you put them in charge and let them make these decisions that they know nothing about, you run into this where there's unintended consequences because they're not using the right terms. They're not thinking about, well, hey, if we say this, what could that affect outside of our intention? They don't care. They just wanted to be able to control women and impose their religious and personal beliefs on the community, despite the fact that the majority of Americans believe there should be some period where an abortion should be allowed to be obtained. And we've talked about all that. So, of course, there's been this fallout. And now other states who have similar bans are starting to question, oh, should we stop IVF treatments? Could we be in trouble if we have to dispose of embryos? What does this mean? And so it's caused shockwaves to go throughout the country. Um, Democrats, of course, by and large, supported, at least some form of abortion being allowed up to certain points. It differs, obviously. Everyone has a different opinion on that. And by and large, Republicans have realized that abortion and the overturning of Roe v. Wade is not a winning political strategy. So they're not promoting, depending on what their district, their constituency, some who are safe in whatever district or state that they're in, they have no problem talking about it. But those in more swing districts or may lose their seats have not really been talking about it. And now this IVF issue has made it even worse of a political problem. So Republicans have been trying to come out and say they support IVF, which is great. That's good to hear. They should. And so let's go ahead and do something about it. But none of them really are. And no surprise, one of the do-nothings is our own National Nancy. That's right, Representative Nancy Mace. She's been going on Twitter talking about how she'll do anything to support IVF. Again, great, but words mean nothing. Actions are what we need from her. And she has done nothing. She's just done, as usual, performative things. So first of all, the problem here is her saying that she supports IVF altogether. Well, she supports the Life at Conception Act, which is, although not officially in law, it was something that has made its way through Congress over the last couple years, different versions of this bill that says essentially life begins at conception, fertilization. So a piece of legislation that she supports, she co-sponsored, is similar to what's going on in Alabama and what led to that problem in Alabama. So she co-sponsors a bill that, if passed, could have the exact same ramifications because it defines that life begins at that fertilization moment. So if you really do support IVF, you're one of those people who didn't realize or didn't care what unintended consequences this Life at Conception Act would have. Okay, well, we've got that out of the way. She's been fact-checked it on Twitter. The little community notes are basically saying, well, she's saying this now, but look at what she did. So she then comes out and puts out a press release saying that she has introduced a resolution that supports IVF and made it seem like she was putting forth some legislation that would protect this treatment. lo and behold, it is all just a show and a bunch of pandering, because this resolution that she introduced is non-binding. It's not something that will be enacted into law. So essentially, she releases this pandering piece of text is all it is. And this resolution basically just says that, yes, the Alabama court found that frozen embryos are considered unborn children, and this has jeopardized access to IVF treatments in Alabama. And so it notes that, and then goes on to say that they're calling on elected officials to proactively pass legislation to protect access to fertility care, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all it really is. It's just basically being like, hey, we support IVF and we think legislators, should pass something to protect this procedure. That's all it does. If this gets passed, it doesn't affect federal law or any law whatsoever. It literally does nothing. Unfortunately, one local news organization kind of just ran with what her press release said and put up a story that said that she introduced something to protect IVF. They got kind of blasted by some people, and to their credit, they took down the story and said that they made a mistake. This did not meet their journalistic standards, and they were sorry about it. That was ABC News 4 for those who are interested. And so that didn't help, where it made it seem like she was actually doing something for a little bit. But I think now everyone kind of realizes that this is just a pandering piece of crap. It doesn't do anything. It's saying, I believe IVF should be protected, but apparently not enough to introduce any legislation to actually work to protect it. So no surprise, National Nancy at it again. In that same vein, there are some politicians, including some here in South Carolina, that are actually trying to do something about the problem. The South Carolina Democratic Caucus addressed this IVF issue during a press conference at the State House last week. Members of the House and Senate also, in addition to the South Carolina Democratic Caucus introducing something, the Senate also filed the In Vitro Fertilizations Protection Act. So there's two different pieces of legislation that are working its way through both sides of Congress here in the state. They're basically the same thing. There's a little bit of difference between them, but obviously they're doing this in response to what happened in Alabama. So thankfully, there's some politicians actually trying to do something here. So the legislation basically says embryos are not and shall not be considered children, which then would alleviate any issues with the IVF treatments being able to continue on. The act obviously is aiming to keep families in control of their futures and preventing any closures of fertility clinics here in the Palmetto State. The House legislation also says they believe in a woman's rights and that they have the ability to make decisions for themselves and their families. Shouldn't be something we have to put into a piece of legislation, but this is where we are in the year 2024. The slightly broader and more bipartisan Senate version, so the House Democratic Caucus put together that first piece, but the Senate actually has bipartisan support off the bat. Although, I'm sure the House version will have some bipartisan support as well. Just when it was introduced, it was just the House Democratic Caucus that had done it. The Senate version is similar. It would also prevent what they call undue burden being placed on access to reproductive technologies, and it stipulates that fertility clinics are not required to preserve sperm, eggs, or embryos outside the human body, basically just fixing this issue that we were seeing that's happening in Alabama. So thankfully, our local legislators here, in our state Senate and our state House, are actually working with real pieces of legislation. Now, obviously, it has to work its way through. It has to be voted on and goes through committees and, has to be passed by both chambers and then go to the governor. So we're not there yet, but they're working on it. Unlike Nancy Mace, who's just releasing a resolution saying, I support it, but I'm not going to do anything about it. So I'm definitely thankful that at least these legislators are actually working to work towards a solution on this problem that could potentially come to our state. Lots of other stories to get to. Unfortunately, running out of time for this week or for today's episode, so I'll have to move some to Wednesday's show. But real quick, wanted to make sure we talked about this, as a lot of people are very familiar with this case. The woman accused of driving drunk and causing a crash that killed a newlywed bride on Folly Beach last year was let out of jail on Friday afternoon, just hours after a judge set bond. Jamie Lee Komorowski, who was 26, was charged with 1 count of reckless homicide resulting in death and 3 counts of felony DUI resulting in great bodily injury or death in that April 28th, 2023 crash that killed newlywed Samantha Miller and injured her husband, Eric Hutchinson, and 2 others. The accident, as you remember, came just hours after their wedding ceremony. So the judge set a $150,000 bond Friday morning. It was paid and she was let out. But there are stipulations to this. And one reason she was given bond, you may remember back when, after she was arrested and been in jail and had bond hearings and things, she was denied bond. But it was stipulated that if this case didn't go to trial by a certain time frame, which I believe was the beginning of March, which is why this happened, she would be given some sort of bond option. And so that's what happened. Now, in addition to that, there were stipulations back then that were put into place as soon as she was let out of jail. So she's only allowed, she's going to be placed on house arrest. She's only allowed to leave for medical emergencies or court orders. So she basically can't leave. She will also be required to wear something called a SCRAM device. It stands for Secure Continuous Remote Alcohol Monitoring. So these devices monitor the wearer's blood alcohol levels through sweat. So obviously, they're checking to see if she's been drinking, even though she's not allowed to leave, wherever she's staying. They still want to make sure she's not drinking any alcohol. In addition to that, Komorowski had to surrender her passport. She has to live somewhere in Charleston County, and she cannot drive. So even if, like they said, she can leave wherever she's staying for medical emergencies or court orders, she's not allowed to drive to any of those things. So very much she is locked down on house arrest. Very minimal chances for her to actually leave that property, and her alcohol blood levels are being monitored. So definitely some pretty strict stipulations on what she can and can't do now that she's out of jail. Lots more going on, lots of updates to past stories we've talked about. I will get to them on Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to go vote in the best of Charleston. Have an amazing week. I hope it's awesome. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And a big thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show as well. I'll continue getting you caught up on the latest news on Wednesday. Until then, good night and good luck.